If you enjoy the channel and our video content and would like to support us, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can sign up to our Patreon site, which is a monthly subscription to one of our 4 tiers, each giving you something different from early access interviews up to exclusive unseen footage. There's also the option of a one-off donation via PayPal, which allows you the option to donate an amount of your choice. Both options really help to keep this channel going and to continue putting out regular content for you good folk. So please take a look at aircrewinterview.tv/donate, and I thank you in advance. Thank you and enjoy. So Nasty, when did you become interested in aviation?
Well, Mike, I first of all, I love being on here with you and seeing everything posted on social media and your channel and the people you talk to. So the vibe is awesome here. So I'm just happy to be here. For your listeners, this is morning time for me at Annapolis, Maryland. That's where I'm sitting in my I Love Me room, surrounded by aviation stuff and ship stuff too, because I got to do both. And maybe we'll talk about that. But you know, way back when 1974-ish, I decided I wanted to go to the Naval Academy and follow my father. And there's a little story in my book about that. But I was thinking I wanted to go fly. I want to go to the Naval Academy and go fly. And in that time, so I was, I don't know, in the 8th grade or something like that. But well before that, my mom showed me this like a kindergarten lined paper where you learn how to write cursive for your teacher, and stuff.
Yeah.
Anyway, there's this picture of a jet. It's a penciled picture of a jet that I obviously drew, and I wrote a story that I was going to go fly airplanes in Vietnam, because I guess at that time when I was a boy, Vietnam was going on. My father was deployed over there for a year, and so I had that in my head that I was going to fly an airplane. I says, I'm going to go fly an airplane. So, and that was very early on. It was when I was some single-digit age, and so somehow aviation's been in my blood since I was a very young child, and I've always been taken by it, but not taken by doing it, not like, and I always look up when an airplane goes over. It doesn't matter what kind it is. I'll look up at jet noise, or I'll think about, that's a single engine jet, that's a fighter, no, that's a commercial airplane, sort of as an aside thought. Mm-hmm. But I didn't have really aviation pictures all over my room when I was a kid or anything like that. I just was interested in doing it. Nice. So obviously it started when I was very, very young.
And did you always want to become a pilot, or did you know that you could be a backseater back then as well?
I really wanted to fly. I just had it in my head. I didn't actually know that there was another position in the airplane. Okay. And when I went down to when I went to the Naval Academy, I did learn that there was an opportunity to be a crew member in the another seat than actually flying. But I was bent on going to fly. So I wanted to have the stick and throttle in my hands, and I was just kind of that way. That was my dream.
Brilliant stuff. So can you talk us through some of your basic training and some of the aircraft you started on before you got posted to your frontline aircraft?
Yep. So I went down to Pensacola, Florida, which is where all naval aviation candidates get trained. We also train some international folks. I have been in squadrons with people from the UK. And so the international would go through there as well. And so I went down there in late 1981 and started into academics. The first airplane I flew was a T-34C Mentor, a turbo Mentor, very neat turbo prop, single prop, retractable gear trainer. And I started flying that in January of 1982. We use that for our primary flight trainer in the United States, and so when you get to the end of primary, then you split from there based on your grades, and you select what pipeline you're going to go to. So for us in the Navy, you could select either jets if your score was high enough, or helicopters, or large airplanes that lead to like a P3 at the time, in this case a Navy P8, and then your training branches from there. I chose jets, and there are a couple of jet bases in the United States, but I chose to go to Naval Air Station Kingsville, Texas, and I flew starting in 1980, late 1982 or mid 1982, the T2 Buckeye, kind of a fat airplane, twin engine, had these big tip tanks on the wings, straight wings, very, very, very forgiving aircraft. and really fun to fly. And so I did T2 Buckeye for my basic training in jets, and then advanced training at Kingsville was in the A-4 Skyhawk. And so the Skyhawk, the A-4 Skyhawk, was a great airplane. And what I really valued about the upgrade from the Buckeye to the Skyhawk was the Skyhawk was a little bit unforgiving. So you could do a lot in the T2 Buckeye, and it was very forgiving airplane, very stable, relatively easy to fly. The Skyhawk, you had to kind of watch out every once in a while. If you got yourself parked in an out of control maneuver, kind of nose high, and it came down, it could be kind of nasty. And then if you got yourself at one of the slats, and the slats were mechanical in the Skyhawk, very, very awesome mechanical flight surface characteristic. But you could, if you were pulling G and you got in a rolling turn, you could trap one of the slats up, and now you're doing this. And so if you had a slat, I forget what they called it, like a slat trapped up or something like that, you had to get the airplane unloaded to stop that roll. Otherwise, you weren't gonna recover. That never happened to me, but the airplane was a little more unforgiving. It was a little more unforgiving in a crosswind to land. So you kind of upped your game a little bit to fly that TA4J. So the total flight hours down in the training command, T34, T2, and TA4J were about 300 hours of time, with most of it being in jets, before I selected for Tomcats and went to the West Coast. And so then I flew the Tomcat in the West Coast. That started my tactical aviation career.
Yeah, well, obviously going to get onto the Tomcat, one of the most beautiful planes ever built. But yeah, because obviously the Skyhawk, it was a frontline jet, wasn't it? But so like as a training aircraft, that must have been quite challenging.
It was really cool. So the TA4J is a two-seater. It has a less powerful engine than like the A4 Mike, the A4M, and then A4E. Those were monsters, and single-seat A4s were used for, and still are used for in some places, adversary aircraft. But you strapped on, first of all, you strapped on the airplane. It was very, very, very small and was very maneuverable. So it rolled 2 times around a second, 720 degrees a second. So if you whacked the stick over, you would bang your head on the canopy for sure. And the thing would just, roll twice around a second. Fastest rolling airplane I think that we've ever had. Way faster than the Tomcat. I mean, like way faster. But when you put and I can't remember the engine designations that went in there, but the horsepower, horsepower, the shaft horsepower, the thrust on the engines of the single seaters that they used in Vietnam later on. And then the Marine Corps used for a long time, the A4Ms, you could see they had a big hump on their back. They were very, very powerful airplanes. And, things that people loved flying them, because when you sat in the cockpit, it was very tight. It was almost as tight as the chairs that you and I are sitting in, very narrow. If you were a big fella, you kind of had to get yourself into the seat and then hope you didn't have to eject. If you're kind of a medium guy like me, it fit very nice and everything was very close. But you actually felt like you were wearing the airplane. I never got to fly an upgunned single seat A4, but a lot of my buddies flew adversaries, and they loved that airplane because of how powerful it was, how easy it was to fly. It was small, so you could do really well in air combat maneuvering training, and it was just fun. So so the TA4J, and I thought it was pretty cool. And in fact, one of my solos, Mike, they had a TA4J that had been just transferred down to VT21 where I was, and it was in camouflage. So it wasn't the standard orange and white. It was this gray camouflage. Man, I felt badass. I got to fly that airplane solo, and I came back and landed. I just felt badass because I was in a camouflage jet.
So you felt almost like a real fighter pilot right then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I did.
And obviously, before you went on to the Tomcat, you must have had a few traps on the board. Can you tell us about your first time on that? Was it with the Buckeye?
Yeah. Yes, it was with the Buckeye. Let me tell you a funny story about Tomcat, and I'll tell you where my head was, going all the way back to your first question. I'm going to fly Tomcats. I went down to flight school. I went from Annapolis I was 6 months of a temporary additional duty out in San Diego, flying with an adversary squadron, and just stashed at the squadron for 6 months before I went to Pensacola. But I showed up in Pensacola, and when I was issued my helmet, I had not even stepped into an airplane yet. I hadn't even gotten my flight gear on yet. And when I was issued my helmet, I cut a silhouette of a Tomcat out of reflecting tape and put it on my helmet. No kidding. And I stuck it on my helmet. I'm flying those. Now, if I'd have showed up as a student and another me was an instructor down there, and I saw a student with a Tomcat sticker on his helmet, he'd have a target on his head, man. Oh, okay. You think you can fly jets? And it was so funny because nobody said anything about it. I mean, they never teased me or they never hammered me or anything. They just, I had a great time flying. So I stuck that Tomcat on my helmet. So I get down there, and yes, you're right. So that's the first part of the thing. So I'm focused on getting a Tomcat slot at the end of flight training. That's all I want is that slot. And so to answer your question, yeah, part of the training in Navy jet training is you go to the boat twice. You go in the T2 and you go in the A4. I actually went 3 times because I failed the first time in the A4.
Right.
And I'll tell you that story. But in the T2, I went out and we trained. So every time we land in the training command, and every time we land, even in our gray jets, we do a carrier landing approach and touchdown on the runway. So it's like a bam, and then you roll out. So you don't flare until you get more experience, and then you kind of flare the airplane just to kind of to do it. But when you're landing and practicing landing on the ship, or you're landing on the ship, you don't pull back on the stick to arrest the sink rate. You come straight down into the wires. And so we trained all that time in the T2, and then we get done with landing practice. They take us out to a carrier. So I went to the USS Constellation off San Diego in the T2. I qualified. You get 2 touch and goes and 6 day traps, and I don't remember them.
Really?
No idea what happened. I was so saturated with the environment. I just went out there. I don't even remember who I flew on. I don't remember the feeling of it. I don't remember being towed around a flight deck and on a cat going off the cat. I just know I went out there and qualified, got 6 traps, and then I was done. Like, okay, good. Now it's the next, I can go to the next step because that's the last qualification. But I was so sensory saturated, Mike, that I didn't remember any of it. I don't remember qualifying in the T2 at all.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So at this point, did you know you were going to go on to Tomcats?
No, I didn't. That was just my goal. And so when I went to the Naval Academy, I wanted to do as good as I can to get a pilot slot. And then when I got a pilot slot and I went to Pensacola, I wanted to do as good as I can so I could get Tomcats. But, they graded you in academics, your flight performance, and all of these grades. And so I had to get through the T-34 with high enough grades to be able to select jets. So you see there's these like hurdles the whole way. Yeah. Like you're climbing these series of mountains. And so when I got to the end of T-34s, I had jet grades. The Navy standard score of mine was high enough to select jets. And so I got to select jets and go to Kingsville. And then it was my job to, and my goal to get through basic training and then advanced training with good enough grades to get to the end of that section when I got my wings of gold. And if there was a Tomcat slot, to be able to be of a high enough rank to choose that slot. And that at the end of the day, that's what happened. I managed to get, and maybe we're jumping ahead of your question set, but at the end of advanced training, when I had finished everything and finally qualified in the A4 at the boat, then there was a list of quotas or a list of opportunities, and there were 2 Tomcat slots, one at Miramar and one at Oceana, East Coast, and there was actually a Hornet slot that was I was in the first class that was offered an opportunity for Nugget pilots, so brand new pilots, to select Hornets. I didn't want a Hornet, so Super Hornet was brand new, or the Hornet was brand new, and I was the #1 guy that finished in my class across the nation. So all of the graduates of flight training at the end of each week, were across the nation, and I could select anything I wanted. So I chose that Tomcat at Miramar because that's where I wanted to go ever since I was in the middle of the Naval Academy, several years before. So, and that's when I got to the end of flight training and the list came out and I was allowed to choose the Tomcat in April of 1983. That's when I knew I was going Tomcats.
And yeah, I mean, back in the day, was it a con? It was nasty. You got Tomcats. How did that feel when you knew you were going to Miramar on the Tomcat?
Oh, I can't, win the lottery, Christmas, your birthday, all at once.
All at once, yeah.
I mean, I was so excited for 2 reasons. One, that airplane is the sexiest airplane in the free world. That thing is badass. I really wanted to go and I got it. And then I was just excited. I mean, so I made my goal, but it was like, oh my gosh, now I get to go fly a Tomcat. And I was ecstatic. It was just epic feeling to be selected to go do that. And what's really cool is I was offered the opportunity, and somebody actually asked, hey, don't you want to go to the new Hornet? Like, nope, I want to go to Tomcats at Miramar. I don't. I want to do that. And that felt really good. I had a choice. And I had generated my own choice by my performance in flight school. And so I tell people when they go to Navy flight school, don't drop the pack, don't just cruise through there and figure out what they're going to give you. Drive yourself through there and do as good as you can so that you get to fly what it is you want to fly.
Yeah, and that obviously I think Tomcat would be at the top of the tree for a lot of pilots and RIOs. But so when you were going through your training, what was it actually like working with a RIO for the first time?
Oh, it was cool. I actually like flying with somebody else a lot. You get somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
And I always had a real great comfort, nighttime around the boat, that I was not, there was somebody else watching in case I was, maybe distracted. So that person's, if they're doing their job right and we're both, paying attention, or if I'm distracted, we're not going to fly in the water because he's looking, he's doing things like, hey, watch your altitude or something like that. So, and I just enjoyed flying with another person. I enjoyed the crew coordination and the repartee. Yeah. And, you're going across country somewhere and you're going with somebody. I mean, you probably choose to go with him. He's one of your buddies. And so instantly it's like it's like a buddy movie, right? You take a Tomcat somewhere and you can go have a good time. And it was just really fun. And of course, in VF 124, the training squadron, they teach you as you show up how to work with a radar intercept officer at the time of RIO. And so always in the training command, obviously you're a student, there's an instructor pilot. And when you go out to the fleet and you get assigned out there, you're a nugget pilot and there's a senior person who is flying with you. And so, and then the nugget RIOs would fly with a senior pilot. And that way the knowledge would, you'd share that knowledge from a more senior person. There are some squadrons that do nugget, cockpit, or both nuggets. But okay. I think we have to be careful with that. The way you do that in two-seat airplane, because you can both get yourself in trouble. And you haven't seen it before. Your experience base hasn't built up. So the way they did it in the training squadron was great. And you just learn so many things from really, really, really good RIOs. And the really, really good RIOs actually understand a lot about the front seat. Like a lot. They've studied, so I've flown with some guys that are just spectacular. They've got wonderful air sense. They've actually got a good idea of what to do with the airplane. They might not know what to do with the stick, and the throttle. You go, but just make it go like that. Yeah. And then a lot of the really good ones also spent time in the front seat simulator. And so they could learn where things were. So as an instructor, they could say, hey, at your right hip, there's a switch, hold that switch and do the other thing with your left hand. Or that circuit breaker for you is actually right here, kind of behind your back. And so you got to kind of reach around. So their familiarization with the cockpit, they would earn that in the simulator and then be able to teach the student pilots in front, what could happen to you. So I learned a heck of a lot from the backseaters. I also learned basic crew coordination, like when, hey, the RIOs got the radios and the RIOs have got the radar. And so you learn to be efficient in the cockpit. You're not fighting each other with an experienced RIO when you learn how to fly effectively with a RIO. Two people in a Tomcat or two people in a Super Hornet F model become more than 1 + 1. Mm-hmm. You can do a lot more. The multiple of two people in there, especially in a very high threat, high stress, high information environment, those two people are really synergistic. And so if you learn how to do that really well, and you're focused on learning that skill set, it works out really good.
Yeah. So what was your first frontline squadron, and what was it like, going on your first cruise? That must have been quite terrifying, I can imagine. It's
really interesting. So my first squadron is the VF-51 Screaming Eagles out of Miramar. What was great is I qualified at the boat, and I was a Pri A guy, and so Priority A was a squadron that was about to go on deployment or already on deployment was going to get a new pilot because they needed a replacement pilot, and so you had to do well through the training squadron, and you had to do well at the boat so they could count on you to just, be ready to go and go out there and not need a set of workups. And because I had gone to the boat twice in A4s, and I failed my first carrier qualification in A4s because I kept pushing the nose down to land. I landed 6 times, but I was not doing the right thing. And I didn't quite figure it out through the 2 touch and goes and 6 arrested landings in the A4. So I got another chance. That's a story in the book, too. It felt like a failure to me. But what I actually recognized is I now recognize what failing at the boat felt like. So I knew how to fix the problems. And in fact, as I mentioned to people, I like people who failed the first time, because they see what those deviations look like. And oftentimes, if you don't see the deviations or you're really good at it, you won't know what to do when you're in a bad place on the approach. Mm-hmm. And so what happened, because of that extra carrier qualification, when I went to Tomcats day and night, I did pretty well. And the first time you qualify at night at the carrier is in your gray airplane. So the first time I went to the boat at night was in Tomcats. And we had during the second or third day of qualification at night, we had some pretty bad weather. And so I had the opportunity to fly the airplane on instrument approaches down to just a little bit lower than the normal minimums they would do for the students. But I got all that kicked out. So I was assigned to VF-51 Screaming Eagles. I got there in June of '84. We deployed in July of '84. And so as I went out there as a nugget, of course, now I'm in the fleet, and so there's this feeling that I'm not a student anymore. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, okay, I'm not a student anymore. Here I am, a cocky, kick-ass freaking fighter pilot. And every once in a while, that bit me in the ass. Yeah. But what I felt like all the time, it wasn't fear. It was this tension. It was a sports-like tension in my gut. And so as you flew around the ship, there was always this sense that something is about right here over your shoulder. And so you're like on all the time. And you're where's my fuel and where's the boat and what am I supposed to do and how do I make this mission work? Everything was new on the first cruise. So whatever mission, if I go up, and we learned how to in-flight refuel in the training squadron as well. So now I had to in-flight refuel like for real, or 1,000 miles from anywhere. I can't screw that up. I got to be able to take gas. And so everything had more of a mandate to it, if that's the right word, and just more of a tension. You were just up all the time, adrenaline flow, tension, thinking about where's the ship, what's my fuel, how do I get back? What if something happens here? You get, something happens in one of the engines. Now you're coming back single engine, or all of a sudden something happens to the flaps, and now you got an asymmetric flap. And the Tomcat and the old airplanes, A7, A6 Tomcats, the older airplanes, you had about an emergency of flight. There was something that the RIO had to call it breaking out the book. Hey, break out the book. I got this light, and so it would affect the approach to the ship. And so if you had a flap problem or a gear problem, coming back and maybe one of the gears says unsafe, so now one of your gears unsafe. And you have no idea whether right at landing the airplane's going to crash down and, land on the side of the failed gear. And I had several of those that they were bad micro switches. And so I steeled myself, coming on an approach, straight in approach, unsafe right main gear, and you just roll out normal. But right as you touch down, you're steeling yourself for a boom, kind of a roll out thing like that. So it's kind of feelings like that, this sense of anticipation and strain that you would get done with the event, and there's always this endorphin letdown from kind of like working out, that kind of thing. That's kind of what it felt like. And then my second deployment was best ever because I knew everything, and I was qualified as a mission commander. I'd seen it all. I'm a cocky lieutenant, pretty good in the airplane, probably fairly dangerous, because most of mishaps occur about the 700-hour point in the jet, because people are a little bit overconfident.
Got ya.
So when they do a statistics run for naval aviation safety, right around 700 hours for pilots is a little bit of a danger area for potential mishap. And, things happen because you're probably a little bit too much on the confident side. But that deployment, again, in VF-51, was just epic because I knew the airplane. I knew how to fly with RIOs. I could teach. I learned how to be a landing signal officer on the side, so I have an additional part of my career as a landing signal officer, and then knew how to fly the airplane, knew the airplane pretty well. And then, of course, between cruises, I got selected to go to Top Gun, so I was a Top Gun graduate, went there in '85. And so I was feeling pretty much top of my game.
Brilliant stuff. And one of our favourite subjects on this channel is a DACT or BFM. How did the A model fare against, the F-15s, the Hornets at the time?
Oh yeah, it was a tough fight. You really, really had to fly a perfect A, because the TF-30 engines in the airplane were so underpowered. And so you had to be very aggressive in your maneuvering. You had to fly it exactly on the edge of the piece of S curve. But it typically down lower with an F-15, so 15,000 feet and lower, you do pretty well because the Tomcat wings are, of course, straight out when you're pulling. And so you got a better wing surface area in a fight than an F-15 does, but he's got way better engines, way better equipment. I call the F-15 God's jet. I always do. And of course, the brand new F-15EX is out there, and that is, oh my gosh, they made a fly-by-wire. There's stuff on there. The thing goes over Mach 2. It is an amazing airplane. But I don't know that I ever won a 1v1 with an F-15. They take you up high, and you're not going to do real well up there. And so that airplane's pretty hard to fight in A model. Now, when I was at Oceana, I commanded a D squadron. Now, F-110s in the D, 220 knots, you could go into the vertical with that airplane. And we go fight F-15s at Langley, routinely kick their butt. Because by that time I had more than 3,000 hours in Tomcats, and they kind of thought, well, it's a Tomcat. They're used to A models because that's all they've seen. And the D is guys like, wow, how'd you do that? So we were way better matched. But of course, a really good pilot in a patch wearer in F-15 and a patch wearer in a Tomcat D model, that's a pretty even fight. The other airplanes that, they're pretty hard is an F-16 because all he has to do is just pull, and you can get inside him. But I have gunned F-16s before, because if you get the guy to pull on his limiter, I actually saw a guy in a turn, I'm coming down on him, and he pulls hard into me, and all of a sudden the airplane just goes whoop, whoop, and starts to arc because he had hit his AOA limiter. Yeah. And so he pulled a AOA limiter, and the airplane just arcs right in front of me. It's like, wow. And you could actually see the airplane let go. And so if the pilot makes a mistake in the F-16 and yanks too hard, gets in the AOA limiter, he has to get out of that. Of course, he's got all the thrust in the world, and so he can accelerate out of that, and then he's back into you. But typically, F-16 is very hard, and it's so hard to see because nose on, it's just like a little dot. So that's pretty tough. The airplanes that I fought most of the time when I was training that were not blue airplanes like an F-15 or an F-16 were A4s and F-5s. And the F-5's a pretty good fight. He could disappear, but he was pretty evenly matched with a Tomcat A. An A4 could turn inside you. And so you didn't really want to get in a turning fight with an A4 unless you were extremely aggressive and you stayed in one circle with him, one circle fight. So nose to nose all the time, pulling really hard inside. And typically you've got your nose a lot farther down than him, which means you're losing more altitude than him. Almost every single fight with an A4, I get into a flat scissors with him. Because we both slowed down, and now we're both trying to get behind each other's sixes. So now we're just floating, and that's a bad place to be in a Tomcat. And typically you're not the only guy. So what we used to learn is if you get yourself treed there, think about a multi-bogey fight. Somebody's going to shoot you. But if it's just 1v1, that was just kind of fun. So Tomcat wasn't really good at turning, but it was very, very good in the vertical. So you had to preserve your energy to be able to use that vertical maneuver to come down on the other guy when he ran out of energy.
Yeah, so you mentioned the D there. So what was it like transitioning from the A to the D, and what were the upgrades for the jet? Obviously the engines, but if you can maybe share that with our viewers.
Yeah, the D model was upgraded in a couple of places. First one with the engines, we had GE F-110s. In military power, and I do this with my hands, in military power, the 110s had as much power as the TF-30s in afterburner. When you went into afterburner with the D, that was extra thrust. The airplane was heavier. The Tomcat B model, the F-14B, was an A with the new engine. So that's actually the sports car of the Tomcats, because the only weight added was the weight of the engine. In the Tomcat D model, you had an IRST, infrared search and track. You had a new radar, APG-71 radar over the AUG-9 radar in the A, which was very capable digital radar, the APG-71. You had the new engines, of course, and the heads-up display. You had a Hornet, a Super Hornet style heads-up display. very, very good heads-up display. So in learning how to fly the D model, I went out to VF 101 detachment at Miramar, learned how to fly the D, and it's kind of differences training. So, it flies kind of like a Tomcat, except there's a heck of a lot more thrust. And so you didn't take off an afterburner. You didn't do catapults in afterburner, because if you lose an engine right on takeoff, the airplane's going to depart. You can't. We, in fact, would practice in simulators. You cannot stop the adverse yaw crash that you're going to have if one of the burners blows out. And so you took off in military, and you had to be very careful because you overspeed the gear. 250 knots is gear speed. And in the D model, if you take off and you're a little delayed putting the gear up without bringing the throttles back, even for military, you could overspeed the gear really fast. So the acceleration of the airplane, you had to get really used to that. Other than that, and radar worked really good. And there were multifunctional displays in the cockpit now instead of the steam gauges. And so now the steam gauges, since the HUD was up there and the multifunction displays are up there, that's the first time I learned how to inky dink my way through the buttons in a display. And the steam gauges were down by your left knee. So in case you lost your HUD and the digital displays, you had to transition your scan down to above your left knee and be able to look at the small altimeter and things like that. But that was rare. The funny thing is, when I first started flying the Tomcat D model in the landing pattern, I would turn the HUD down because I didn't want to be a HUD cripple, because they call it a HUD cripple. Yeah. And so I turned the HUD down, and so eventually I go, "You idiot, turn the HUD up because you could fly up the HUD." And it's very precise, and it was absolutely wonderful. When I learned how to fly the Super Hornet 8 years later, same HUD, same exact HUD.
Wow.
Identical HUD. So when I took off the first time in a Super Hornet in 2006 and looked through the front of the airplane, pointy nose, same HUD, guy in the back seat, I thought I was in a Tomcat D model again. So it was really interesting because the HUD was the same. So the D with that HUD, those engines, the IRST, and then the new radar made it a really awesome fighter. And of course, before the D model, we had put the lantern pod on the airplane in the mid 90s or so, a very, very, very precise bomber, because the reticle on the lantern pod was like a cross with an opening in the middle and a 2 mil dot right in the center. And that 2 mil dot you could put on the door frame of the building, and the bomb would go into that door. So the precision of the lantern pod was because the little dot that you had as the reticle, the radar intercept officer could put that dot right where he wanted to go, and the bomb would go very, to exactly the right place. That's what made it such a precise bomber over the Hornet with the AT FLIR or the FLIR pods that they used, because their reticle was actually a diamond, so it was difficult to get the target, in the right place in the diamond, have the bomb hit.
And was there much jealousy from the A guys to the D guys? Were the A still flying when you were flying the Ds?
Yeah. In fact, there were only a couple of squadrons of Ds. So I was in VF 31, had Ds. VF 11 had Ds. VF 1 and VF 2, I think those were the four. No, they were just, everybody's flying Tomcats. And because they're also at the same time, Mike, there were B models on the East Coast. So there were A's, B's, and D's being flown, and people would just go, "Oh, cool! You get to fly a B. What's that like?" Or you get to fly a D. What's that like? Because everybody was a Tomcat guy. So there wasn't really a jealousy as much as an interest in what it was like to fly the other airplane. I never flew a B, never got to. Some guys have D and B experience, and that's where I got the notion that the B was a sports car because of the engines and no additional weight.
And with the D, was there a big learning curve coming from the A? Like, obviously you said the new HUD and stuff, or was it, like one or two sorties you're pretty much settled into that role?
Yeah, I just flying the airplane, simulators, and the hard thing to get used to, Mike, was the acceleration, and just flying it, hard thing on takeoff. Now, the amazing thing was, if you got yourself in a hole in ACM in an A, you never get out of it. You're dead. You're in the hole. It'd take you forever. In the D, you got yourself into a hole, you unload, full afterburner and unload, 1 potato, 2 potato, and you go back in the vertical again.
Wow.
And so that was spectacular because, oh my gosh, I I've pulled myself too low here. I've done my last ditch maneuver, and in the A, that is your last ditch maneuver, and you better get an offensive shot. But in the D, you can do a last ditch maneuver, unload it, one potato, two potato, and now you've got energy back because of the engine acceleration. So that was like a really delightful thing to get used to. And then it was, I think, just sort of learning the full capabilities of the airplane just took a while. I ended up with about 500 hours, a little over 500 hours in the D.
Nice.
And I was pretty much learning the whole time. I got really, really good at landing the airplane on the ship because the engines were really good, the auto throttles were really good, and the direct lift control, the DLC that you actuated with your thumb, where the spoilers would droop when you engage them, and then they would take lift away or add lift to the wings. I got really good at flying the D aboard the ship, and very precise because of the way the engines controlled the airplane, because they had gone to digital flight control. So instead of getting the standard turkey thing in an A coming down, and I still learned as a landing signal officer and then a pilot how to control that airplane pretty well, the A, but the D took away that turkey wobble that you would have coming down. It's a very, very stable airplane. And so I started getting more and more and more precise with that. So later in my tour as a commanding officer, I got pretty good at flying that airplane because its capabilities were so epic.
And I have to ask, what was the banter like or on board, like between the Tomcat and the Hornet guys? That must have been fun.
Oh, it was great. Yeah, that was always like that. We would, during my skipper tour, XO and skipper tour, we're flying sorties over Iraq, and we'd have a big, train. And we weren't an active, my timing in there, we were between, dropping bombs on people and stuff. So we go up and do a lot of presence stuff over Iraq, and we'd get gas from, the Air Force tanker. And it'd be a mixed strike coming back. It'd be a division of Tomcats and a division of Hornets. And we'd go, hey, see you back on the boat, fellas. And we just stroke the burners over Basra and just go screaming away.
Wow.
It was always kind of fun to boom. We called it boom in Basra. And so we'd go supersonic over Basra at 25,000 or 30,000 feet. But then we just accelerate away and go back to the boat because the airplane had so much gas and was so fast. You could just accelerate away from the Hornets. They couldn't go as fast. So we'd tease them all the time. Talk about big fighter versus little fighters.
All in good humor, I'm sure.
Of course.
Yeah. But did the D's always fly with the fuel tanks on the engines, or did you ever fly clean?
No, we flew clean every once in a while if you were going out on some kind of a maintenance hop off the ship, and it was a very short cycle.
Okay, yeah.
But we typically kept, when you go aboard the ship in the A's or the D's, the amount of gas in the Tomcat was the same either way. It was 20,000 pounds of gas, including the tanks. So 16,000 pounds internal, 20,000 pounds when you added the tanks, and so all you always flew with tanks off the ship. Yeah, always, unless there was a time when we wanted to. So if you take the tanks on and off, sometimes the plumbing gets screwed up, and so we just kept the tanks on, to operate there. So those were always on. It didn't matter in the D model if you had more power or stuff. So you always flew with external tanks off the ship. On the beach, flew a lot without tanks. So when you fly out of Miramar or Oceana, tanks would come off and go. So you flew a clean airplane off the beach.
That's pretty awesome. I mean, yeah, when the Tomcat is pretty clean and it's got, in 68 wing, it's just a beautiful aircraft, isn't it? It just looks good. But did you ever go up against an A model in a D, like in BFM?
Oh, good question.
Okay.
I don't think I ever did, Mike. And gosh, if that A model got behind me, I'd be a pretty poor pilot with all the capabilities that he had. But I don't think I ever did. I know it's been done, but I don't think I ever did.
Brilliant. So, have you got any maybe memorable stories to share with our viewers from your time on the Tomcat, either A or B, before we move on to your Hornet time?
Well, so obviously the memorable story I had, the biggest memorable story I have, is I jumped out of an A model in 1987, August of '87. That story's in the book, so I'll leave it. But the short version is I was teaching a student pilot who was in the back seat how to do vertical recoveries in the Tomcat, because sometimes, especially in the A model, if you were looking over your shoulder and going vertical and you got yourself stuck and you didn't have enough to go over the top and the airplane stalled vertically, it was a pretty violent departure. And so we would do these vertical recoveries, and I was trying to show him this vertical recovery, and he wanted to see it a second time, so we did it a second time. And when we went, got the airplane pretty straight up and started to backslide, the right engine or the left engine stalled with a big bang and a yellow fireball by my left ear. And so, wow, that's pretty shocking. And so then I pulled the throttles to idle, which is the procedure for an engine stall in the airplane. Doesn't matter if you're zero airspeed or any airspeed, forward airspeed. And the right engine stalled. Bang, big yellow fireball at the right side. Then the thing starts falling on its back. Very, very violent departure. Both engines are stalled. The alarms are going off. And again, to cut the story short for our time here, I was a little bit too aggressive in trying to recover the airplane so I could get the nose down, so I could gain airspeed. And so I put pro-spin controls in while thinking I was putting anti-spin controls in when the airplane was still in a post-stall gyration. So your listeners will know that you just keep the airplane, let them go, let the airplane go while it's doing that until it comes out of its post-stall gyrations and either settles into a fully developed spin and you put anti-spin controls in, or it recovers and then you fly the airplane away. Well, I put controls in too early, and I kept the airplane out of control below mandatory eject altitude, and we had to end up jumping out. So I jumped out of that airplane, and then there's a little funny story about the parachutes and me and the other guy going down. But that's the most memorable thing I ever did in the A. And then I had a series of boards, 3 boards, that were done about 5 weeks later. I was allowed to fly again, and the very first thing I did, Mike, was I went out over the desert with a RIO and I did a vertical recovery to get back on the horse.
Yeah,
I was like, oh my God, and I didn't touch anything. I put my hands in my lap, my feet on the deck. I didn't touch a thing. Wow. And happily, the airplane did its normal violent departure, came out, no engine stalled, both engines kept running, and we flew right back to Miramar with all that gas. I didn't do anything else.